We just passed 150 people. That is great. We have a lot of content to cover. It looks like most of you have found the chat. That is great. Please use the chat to ask questions, make comments, and our chat monitors will be working diligently to reply. All right, we are at 160, so let's get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome. So good to see you all. My name is Marissa. I'm the National Digital Strategy Director with Sierra Club. It's really great to see some familiar names joining us, many of you returning from previous action hours, and wonderful to see some new names. Welcome, welcome to those who are joining for the first time. Today, our action hour is going to be a little bit different. We're focused on having hard conversations with friends and family. The holidays are here. Many of us are going to be gathering with friends and family, maybe folks we haven't seen in a while, maybe people we see all the time, but we're going to be spending more intentional time together. And some of us might be part of families where everyone agrees and is totally on the same page about everything, and everyone is super involved already. But I'm guessing from the chat that that isn't most of us. Um, so I'm going to introduce this space in just a minute. Next slide, please. But quick, a first review of Zoom basics. I think most of us know this at this point, but there's the place to find the chat and um, another reminder to find closed captioning at the bottom if you'd like it. Okay, next slide. So I want to start by sharing this quote from Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson. This is from a speech at the Time Earth Award Gala. Cultural change usually comes before policy change. This was true for civil rights, for gay marriage. What everyone needs to do is speak up. Right now, 2 out of 3 Americans rarely or never hear about climate on the news or on social media. As long as that silence continues, there's no chance we're going to solve this. And don't let the climate deniers scare you. They may be loud, and too many of them are running our government right now, but they are only 15% of Americans. Someone may think that climate change is not their issue, but it affects everything. Whether you care about national security and food security, public health and racial justice, robust infrastructure and low energy bills, outdoor concerts and sporting events, scuba diving on coral reefs, skiing on real snow, having ice thick enough for ice fishing, eating chocolate and peaches, drinking wine and coffee, or your house not getting swallowed by the ocean, climate is your issue. Addressing the climate crisis is the work of our lifetimes. So I invite you to join me. Act as if you love the future and be tenacious on behalf of life on Earth. This full speech was really powerful, and it's not very long. I think it's only 5 or 6 minutes. So we'll put the link in the chat and send it out in the follow-up email if folks want to save that and watch the full video later. Okay, so before we dive in, let's do a brief overview of action hours and our agenda. Next slide, please. So we'll start with just a quick look at our community norms. Pretty basic stuff. We ask that you all engage with kindness and respect. Be willing to try things out. Some of you might be really familiar and experienced with having these kinds of conversations. Others might not be. And for all of us, these topics can touch on really strongly held values. So it's hard, we know that, but we hope you're willing to try it out. Next, we welcome your questions, comments, constructive disagreements, but please engage with respect. And of course, prejudice and bullying of any kind will not be tolerated during the meeting. And again, if you have questions while we're speaking, please write them in the chat, and we will have time for questions in a few minutes. Okay, great. So next slide, please. What are we doing here today? For those of you new to the Sierra Club, welcome. Feel free to let us know in the chat if this is the first time you've joined anything with the Sierra Club. We're so glad you're here. The Sierra Club is one of the oldest and largest organizations, grassroots environmental organizations in the country. We run powerful national, state, and local campaigns to fight climate change and protect wild places, wildlife, and our communities. We have a great outings program that gets people into nature, and we have 64 chapters in every single state, Washington, D.C., and Puerto Rico. And I'm going to pass it to my colleague Raquel to share just a little bit more about how you can get involved with your local chapter.
Thank you, Mo. Hi, everyone. So happy to be here with you all tonight. My name is Raquel Fernandez Makroff, and I am the Organizing Capacity Director for the Sierra Club, and I'm based out of Orlando, Florida. Woohoo! As Mo said, at the Sierra Club, our chapters are actually the foundation of our movement. We have about 64 chapters across the United States, and including Puerto Rico and DC. Our chapters are building power on the ground to resist harmful environmental policies, push back against the Trump agenda, and tackle present environmental challenges at their state and local levels. No matter what's happening at the federal level, our chapters bring people together to organize, take action, and make real progress in their local communities. They help advance renewable energy solutions, advocate for clean air and water, protect wildlife and public lands, and ensure local voices are being heard at the state legislature. But most importantly, this is our chapters is where you actually can find community. By connecting with your local chapter, you can make an impact in your community while also helping to drive change at the federal level. We encourage you get involved, and we'll drop the link in the chat so you can find your local chapter if you haven't already. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you, Raquel. All right. Next slide, please. So what are we doing here tonight? This is our November Action Hour. Like I said, I see some familiar faces. We've seen some of you before. We started doing these action hours when Trump was elected, with the intention of creating just a monthly space for concerned, overwhelmed, busy people to make sense of everything that's coming at us and figure out how we can take meaningful action together. And we've done some great work. We've made tens of thousands of phone calls to Congress, submitted thousands and thousands of letters. We've written LTEs, letters to the editor of local papers. We've shared hundreds and hundreds of posts on social media, created art and posters, and sent handwritten letters, and a lot more. So today we're focusing instead on the power that we have as individuals who are part of families and friends and networks and neighborhoods to affect change with those people that we know and love. So next slide, please. We are going to start by talking about strategic conversations, different types of conversations. We are gonna invite everyone to think, Thanksgiving is 1 week from today. Who are you going to be seeing in the next week or over the next month during this holiday season? Depending on your relationships or plans for the next few weeks, we might be talking with people who really disagree with us, who are on totally the opposite end of the political spectrum. Or some of us might be having conversations with family who are generally on the same page, but just don't seem to want to get involved, haven't taken action yet. We're going to talk through research-backed tips for both of these types of conversations, what to say, what not to say, how to bring it up, things like that. And after you brainstorm a few specific people or groups that you might want to try these conversations with, we'll identify what topics are most likely to be successful. We'll start to kind of map out how to broach these conversations, maybe even prepare a few bullet points so we can head into Thanksgiving ready to roll. Okay, let's do it. Next slide, please. All right, so why have these tough conversations? Because we need to, is really the answer. We are in a bad spot. It's been over a year since this country elected Trump for the second time, and I know I don't need to tell anyone that it's been such an incredibly painful, stressful, frightening time. We see people getting snatched off the streets, out of daycare centers and restaurants, and prices for groceries and healthcare and energy bills are going up, up, up while wages get cut, jobs get cut, and the billionaires rake in more money. And now we have a trillionaire. So, we're seeing all of our precious lands and waters losing these critical protections that we fought so hard to win over the last few decades under President Biden. Um, and misinformation is running wild more than ever before. Um, I saw a lot of you talking in the chat about how you don't know how to have these conversations with your friends and family because um, they believe a totally different set of facts, right? Quote unquote facts. And it's hard to imagine how we could ever heal these divisions, um, how we can get through it. So yeah, it's a lot. We're going into this training tonight knowing that this is a hard thing. And when disagreements come up with people we love, it is painful. It can be incredibly painful because debating politics isn't just an academic exercise, right? These topics, not always, but often touch on our deepest values, on our identities, on the things that we hold dear and our hopes for our children for the future. And the reason I want to just be upfront that these conversations are hard, they are risky, right? It's it's risky. It's a big deal to broach these hard conversations with people who we love and who we rely on, right? Our friends and family. But the reason that we're doing this anyway is because these conversations have enormous power. There is a whole body of research and organizing work that has been studied by hundreds of movement scholars and advocates. It's often called relational organizing, that shows how effective it is to talk to friends and family. And especially in this time of rampant misinformation and disinformation and polarization, with so much distrust of traditional media, um, and establishment political groups, including nonprofits, each of us, are the most effective messengers to our friends and family. I know it doesn't feel like it sometimes when we have these frustrating conversations that don't feel like they get anywhere. But the research really shows that it is true. The people that you know are far more likely to be open to changing their minds if you talk to them than if Sierra Club, for example, tries to convince them or recruit them. Um, and I know that when I'm talking to someone who really disagrees with me, it can be very hard to stay calm. Does anyone else feel that way? Like raise your hand or let me know in the chat. My heart starts beating and I start sweating, and it's so hard to keep my cool. Um, it has gotten a bit easier over time, with practice, but I still get a little sweaty. Um, and it's just hard. So I really know that, and I'm so grateful to all of you for being here. Um, Knowing that what we're talking about is really challenging. And next slide, please. I do, want to just emphasize this. Each of us can decide whether or not to engage in these conversations. This is a choice to have these courageous, strategic conversations when you are feeling calm, when you are feeling ready and resourced and like you're really able to do it. Because the thing is, changing hearts and minds is not fast work. It is slow. It is hard. We are playing the long game here, and you are probably not going to convince someone to totally change their opinion in just one conversation. We really have to be willing to listen, to um, let go of that desire to debate every piece of misinformation, and sometimes to hear some hateful or hurtful things, and that is not easy. So remember to use your judgment, check in with yourself, and make an intentional choice about whether to have this conversation. And remember, the goal is not to have a fun time with a friend where you're getting to share how you feel. This is a strategic choice to try to move somebody. So, with that, we're going to dive into two main categories of the conversations that we're calling persuasion conversations and activation conversations. But first, I want to offer a framework that we use called the spectrum of support. I love this tool. Next slide, please. That can help us think about our goals for a conversation like this. So, this is a tool that comes from George Lakey and Training for Change. It helps us analyze where people in our life fall along the spectrum from active opposition on one extreme to this is labeled active allies. You can call it active support on the other side. And most people we know will likely fall somewhere in the three middle, but of course, people can fall on the extreme ends as well. And so, one of the most important takeaways from this tool is that you see these arrows are not starting in active opposition and moving all the way over to active support. They're moving one segment at a time. And that's because people usually only move one segment at a time. It is very rare that someone who is in the active opposition, someone who is going to MAGA rallies, who is organizing in their communities to get rid of endangered species or block clean energy or trash clean water protections, they are not going to jump all the way over to getting involved with the climate movement in one conversation. If anyone has seen that, please let me know. I would love to hear about that. But instead, we should think about this tool as a way to try to persuade people to move just one step closer to our position, wherever they're starting, wherever they fall along that spectrum. So for example, moving someone who is actively organizing against you into passive opposition, right? So they still might disagree with you, but perhaps they're not trying to fight against you so much anymore. Maybe they're going to stop going to the MAGA rallies, or maybe they're still going to go to the MAGA rally, but they're not going to show up to try to block the local clean energy project. So moving over in neutral, that's the middle. You could think of them as unengaged or uninformed. Maybe they don't have a strong opinion. Moving one more over into passive allies or passive support. These are people who agree with you, but aren't yet doing anything about it. They haven't taken any action. Maybe they don't feel that strongly about it. And then we have active allies or active support. That's all of you here because you've shown up tonight. People who agree, who are on the same page, and who are organizing and fighting and acting alongside you. Okay, so next slide, please. Let's start on the opposition end of the spectrum with people who disagree with you and might be actively trying to stop you, might not be, but they disagree. So this would be a case where you would want to approach it as a persuasion conversation. So here's our scenario. We are sitting at the Thanksgiving table talking to our Uncle John, who's in the active opposition category. He thinks climate change is a hoax. He thinks environmentalists are killing jobs, that there's no such thing as endangered species, they're made up. We should think of our job as a wild success would be to start to move him towards passive opposition. And again, that probably won't even happen with one conversation, but let's think of that as the goal rather than trying to get him to totally forget about all of the beliefs that he has or to start to agree with us. We're not there yet. So how do we do that? Here are a few key strategies that we're going to walk through. We're going to share all of these slides later, and we have a very thorough guide that walks through all of this in a lot of detail. But I'm just going to talk through the three big strategies that are backed by research about how to do this successfully. First, lead with shared values, not data or alarm. This one is so hard. It's so hard. But there are a few reasons to do this. So first, a lot of us, even if we are on totally opposite sides of an issue, can actually point to the same core values that are driving those opposite opinions. Vaccines are a great example. People on both sides of this issue really care about health and safety. That is a shared value. But mistrust in our institutions and healthcare systems, among other things, um, have left people susceptible to misinformation. And knowing that we share this core value can help us figure out how to approach the conversation in the right way. Another value might be autonomy or integrity. It might be fairness. These are values that a lot of people hold and share. And so if we can identify what the underlying values are, we can not only connect with the other person about that core belief, but we make ourselves more relatable and trustworthy. It's easy for someone to convince themselves that you're making up a statistic, the fact you're telling them the data isn't real. It's much harder for them to entirely disregard when you share the values that are driving your beliefs because it is true. It is true to you, right? They can't say that you don't believe that you don't have that value. And the other thing is that putting data in the back seat also relieves you from having to be an expert on climate change or environmental issues. You don't need to have a PhD level of understanding of carbon molecules or ocean circulation patterns to be ready to have these conversations. And besides it, like I said, it probably wouldn't work anyway. If you ambush people with facts and figures, if you try to alarm them by telling them how urgent and terrifying climate change is and how all the coral reefs are dying, it is likely going to backfire. And I know I fall into this trap a lot because these issues are alarming and urgent and scary. And I sometimes you want to shake people and get them to see. Um, but most of the time, this will cause the other person to shut down, even if they're inclined to agree with you. And if they aren't listening, there's no point to having the conversation, right? You may as well just skip it. So next, I'm gonna speed up here a little bit. Ask open-ended questions, right? So just listening and reflecting the person's words back to them. It so often feels like we're talking past each other or just waiting for the other person to finish so we can get our point in, especially if we really disagree, right? Um, but if the other person can feel heard and listened to, even if they are spouting lies, if they can feel respected, that will get you a long way, right? And that's really what we're trying to bring to show that even if you can't find a lot of common ground, um, you are someone who has different views, but you still want to hear what they have to say and respect them, and it will make them a lot more likely to listen to you when it's your turn to talk. And the other thing is that you really want to learn something. You actually, you don't want to just pretend to listen. This is your chance to learn. What do they care about? What do they believe in? Why do they think that? Where did they hear that? Um, so, this is the moment I think where for me, I almost lose it sometimes, but it's the moment to remember that this isn't a regular conversation. It is a strategic choice that you are making to engage because you care about building the movement and doing all you can to shift the people in your life. Okay, and then third, debunk gently. Um, so this is the part of the conversation where you just want to try to start to plant these seeds of doubt. Remember, you're probably not going to entirely change their mind, but you could try sharing one fact, one one counter to a myth or misconception that they brought up. Don't try to correct every single point that they raised. Just pick one. And there are many ways to do this. I see people in the chat talking about how personal stories are really powerful. Yes, if you have a personal experience you can share, that is always a really good route to take because it comes with a lot of inherent credibility because it happened to you. This can also yeah, if you want to pull out a key fact or statistic, it's always helpful if you have the source memorized. This part feels daunting to me. When I get flustered, I just forget all of that. But if I know I'm going into a conversation like this, I will just take a minute right before to review a few things. It just takes, a few minutes and then I feel better equipped. Um, okay, that was a lot. I'm going to move on to the activation conversations, which are going to use some of the same principles. So next slide, please. Great. So There might be a lot of reasons why someone falls, if you recall that spectrum of support, there might be a lot of reasons why someone falls in the neutral or passive support categories. Um, all of us have a lot going on. There's a lot of demands on our time and attention. The media has not done a good job at educating people about climate and environmental issues. And these topics are difficult. They are overwhelming. They are depressing, and they make people feel like they want to disengage and like there's nothing they can do anyway, so why bother, right? But I wanted to highlight these statistics on the screen here because huge percentages of Americans are actually quite worried about climate change. We saw other statistics that had that number at 76%. It varies a bit, but I think 70% is a very safe number. It varies by political party, of course. But another one showed 73% of independents, 63% of non-MAGA Republicans, important distinction. That's from July 2025 poll. And 74% say they are willing to change their lifestyles to reduce the worst effects of global warming. So those top numbers, and then compare that to the bottom, right? 81% of people say they rarely or never discuss climate change. 72% have never been engaged by a friend or family member to talk about it. So that's a huge gap between the number of people who are concerned and the number of people who are talking about it. But that means we have an opportunity, right? That means each of us has tremendous power at our fingertips. And every conversation that we have can really make a difference. Next slide, please. And there's a few reasons for this. So first, right, apathy and overwhelm are powerful forces. I talked about this a little bit, but the world is hard. These topics, climate change, environmental destruction, are horrifying and sad and awful. And it's really important that we try to counteract this by leading with at least a little bit of hope and progress and agency. You've probably heard that people say action is the antidote to despair. That's really true. Um, some people might not be getting involved because they just haven't gotten themselves there, right? So for these activation conversations where we're thinking about people who are more in they already agree, but they're not doing anything, or they're not sure what they think. Um, Once you get people over that apathy and overwhelm hump, people can get going and they'll see that too. The second is that we all just want to be part of something, right? It's hard to do things alone. We all need a buddy. And often all it takes is a personal invitation to get someone to say yes. I know for me, if someone, emails 100 people with me on there and invites me to go to an event or donate to a group, even if I'm interested, even if that organization aligns with what I believe in, even if I want to donate, to be honest, it might not be a priority, right? But if they reach out to me, if they give me a text or a call and say, hey, Marissa, there's this group that I'm working with. I think you really would like to get involved. Here's why I think it's worth your donation or your time. I'm like 100 times more likely to actually do it, right? And people are also very influenced by others around them. There's a ton of research about this. This is true across the board. It's true for consumer choices. When our neighbors, when our peers purchase electric vehicles or put solar panels on their roofs, we become more likely to do the same. It's true for all different types of actions. And then the third one is that beliefs follow action, not the other way around. This is um, this is most true for people who are kind of in the middle and the undecided or neutral. And there is some fascinating research here. Um, we'll send it out later. It's really mind-blowing. We often think that, people hold a belief, many of us hold beliefs, and then we want to seek out actions to align with those beliefs, right? But this is not always the case. This research comes from the the pro-choice movement about people who didn't have a strong opinion about abortion, but got invited to an anti-abortion meeting by a friend. And they went, and the event was fun. It was social. There were maybe some powerful testimonials. So they had a good time, right? There were snacks. They met people they liked. And our brains don't like to have to deal with this tension of having our actions be in opposition to our beliefs. It's very psychologically uncomfortable. So for these people, once they took that first action of going to the anti-abortion meeting and making friends with anti-abortion activists, they shifted their beliefs to match those actions. They changed their minds. And in this research, 1/4 of the people interviewed consider themselves to be pro-choice before they went to their first anti-abortion event. So wild stuff. We'll send that around later. And you can use the same approaches that we talked about earlier for these activation conversations, right? So pulling out the person's values, getting them to identify what they believe in, connecting over that. Next, asking questions to understand more about their motivations. And third, debunking gently. And for activation conversations where this is with someone who, already agrees with you or who is open to it, this is usually not about, a conspiracy theory. It's more about pushing back when people have fallen into despair, when they think there's no hope, when they think it's too late to solve climate change and that there's nothing they can do. Um, it can be helpful to affirm these feelings. You don't want to minimize them, but then you want to try to pull them out of it, right? Share a personal story about a small action you've taken or a recent victory that the movement has made, or why climate action is still worth it and why every bit we can do is important. Okay, whew, that was a lot. Next slide, please. We're gonna go to questions in just a moment, but I'll leave you with these takeaways. Two types of conversations: persuasion, activation. This is a long process, and try out this approach. Lead with values, listen, and debunk gently. Okay.
Thank you so much, Mo. So my name's Hillary. I use she, her pronouns, and I work with Mo on Sierra Club's National Digital Strategies team. So we've had a few really great questions come in, so we can take down the slides for 1 second and spend a few minutes answering some of your questions, and then we can move on to practice together. Let's see. I'm going to start off with this first question. What if I do having the conversations, I assume, and people are interrupting me and aren't listening to what I'm saying? So yeah, I'll open it to a group of presenters tonight. Mo, as well as my colleagues Megan and Christian, are here. If anyone wants to start with any thoughts.
I can, I can start, but also, team, please weigh in. I'm losing my voice a little because I'm talking too much. Yes, that definitely happens. People love to interrupt each other. But one great way to avoid this is to make sure you have really listened to them first without interrupting them. If you have done that, if they have been able to say their piece, they are far less likely to interrupt you. And the second is that you can just say, "Hey, I'd really like to get this out. Like, is it okay if I speak without you interrupting me?" Just acknowledge it and try to move on. But I found a lot of success that if you really let the other person talk, they're far less likely to interrupt.
Yeah, I think that's great and true. And I'd also add that one tip that's in our guide, and in some other of the resources that we're sharing, is to ask permission before you share your perspective, especially if your perspective is opposing something they said. So for example, if someone says, we can't keep funding clean energy, it's too expensive, my energy bills keep going up, and you're like, oh my goodness, obviously in your head,
clean energy is cheaper than fossil fuels, don't just like, no, 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 sorry, that's wrong. Be like, okay, I hear you. You're worried about your energy bills. Would you mind? I actually have a slightly different perspective on that situation. Would you mind if I shared? And by giving them the opportunity to say what they think, to give you permission, they're less likely to interrupt and they'll be more receptive to hearing it. Okay, great. Another question is, sitting around a room, how do you start a climate conversation? Great question.
One thing that I tried recently was I said, I was reading this article the other day and blank. Or have you guys seen that documentary? Blank. Things that feel like they're kind of natural. It's very basic, but just that don't make it sound like you're sitting everyone down to lecture at them, but more like you're engaging in casual conversation. Um, you could even say, hey, I was thinking about you earlier when I saw this thing on the news. And Hillary's going to lead us through an exercise in just a minute that I think will make this clearer about how, when we're thinking about the people in our lives that we might want to try these conversations with, we can identify what matters to them and our entry point to the conversation for that particular person. So I think the other thing here to remember is that you should approach it differently depending on who you're talking to. Um, yeah, Hillary, do you want to do a quick preview of one of your examples?
I'm gonna be completely honest that I was checking the other questions for answers and I missed what example on what example?
Yeah, if you are a parent or a grandparent and you're connecting with another parent or a grandparent, you have a lot of things in common around your kids or your grandkids.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about that in a little bit, but another example that I didn't include is we got to be careful with coworkers, but say, you work with people and you're talking about union or organizing issues. So for example, like we all see that billionaires are profiting off of our labor and raising prices and making record profits. So that could be a good topic to talk about with a coworker when you're stressing about work concerns, or if it's safe, obviously don't risk your jobs. The example of families are great. Like we all want our children to live in a healthy world where they can spend time outdoors and access nature. And, that's something across political spectrums that people are really care about. Okay, so I think we'll answer a few more of your questions in the rest of our discussion, and then we'll work to send some more answers around afterward. But let's keep going so we can get to practice. All right, so can we put the slides back up? Perfect. So we have, like Mo was saying, the actions are a little bit different today. We are going to be separating this into two parts. First, we're going to identify who you want to be having these conversation with. We'll have time to brainstorm on your own about which specific people or groups you might want to talk with and what kind of topics you could discuss. Next, we'll have the chance to practice with other attendees. I know that breakouts make a lot of us nervous. I know that like often when I attend a webinar, I will be like, nope, not joining the breakout. I'm skipping, or I'm like just gonna practice on my own. But you're welcome to skip. I still recommend you stay on and just continue to brainstorm on your own. But I really do encourage folks to try this out, because the goal is to be having conversations with people that maybe disagree with you. So definitely recommend folks, practice here with the rest of the attendees who are hopefully pretty aligned in values. Okay, next slide. All right, so we're going to get into making a plan. Some folks here might have joined a recent Climate Truth Tellers workshop on similar topics. Those are mostly focused on having conversations online. Today, we're really going to zoom in more on in-person discussions, but a lot of this is very transferable. as Mo was saying, these types of conversations are so critical for building our movement, as our opposition, some folks are talking about this in the chat, like they're really good at spreading their messaging far and wide. They are getting powerful disinformation out to people in our communities and people that we love. And these lies can easily become accepted as fact if we don't challenge them. The more we discuss the truth, the more we can engage people in our communities to care and act. So we have shared a worksheet. It should be in the chat. If not, we can get that in the chat now. And there's a lot of information in that worksheet. We can't cover it all today, but we wanted to provide all of this as a resource, because when we've been doing this work in the past, we've seen in the chat today, we get a lot of folks don't know what to say or where to start these conversations. And a lot of folks ask for more resources and talking points to be able to feel prepared. So hopefully this worksheet is something that you can hold on to and review in the future. But let's jump into why we make a plan. So by coming up with some ideas of what we want to have these conversations about and who we want to have them with, it will help us be less nervous on how to engage. So if you don't have a pen and paper and something to take notes on, you can grab it in a moment, because I definitely want folks to write their ideas down so that you can come back to them. Having planned conversations, especially again, starting with people you feel comfortable speaking with, will make it easier to engage on these topics when they come up in spaces like folks were sharing at the beginning where family members disagree. We have folks who are pushing back on saying things that are really untrue. Practicing helps you feel more prepared for that. So you could even start practicing with someone and tell them exactly what you're doing. So for example, you could say, hey friend, I attended a workshop on having climate change and environmental conversations. I really want to discuss more with my family, but I know they disagree with me on some things. So I was wondering if I could practice what I learned with you. One-on-one convos are incredible. And we also want to encourage folks to try to bring these topics up in group and community settings, so you can really think through the spaces you're already in. So as you can see on the slide, here's a list of a bunch of places you might already be in community. For example, a family holiday dinner, a book club, a parent meetup. I'd love to see, if folks want to chat, I'd love to see if you have other ideas of spaces where you might imagine having these sorts of conversations that you already are part of. So next, once you've started thinking of spaces, oh, yep, church groups, that's great, Kate. Once you started thinking of spaces, you want to ask yourself, who's in those groups? What do they already care about? What might our shared values be? So what do you know that you believe most people in the space care about that you can use as an anchor or common ground? Let's see, I see some great faith groups, carpool group, nurses. Yeah, that's great. These are great spaces to be having these conversations. Democratic Committee, Okay, so an example on common ground, we are talking about this in the question section. Already brought up, if you're in a parent group, you likely care about your family having access to clean air and water. If you're in an HOA or business community, you might all care about high energy prices, or there might be wide support for clean energy and energy efficiency options that could lower bills. If you're in a book club, there's a good chance that everyone in the group cares about free speech, things like that. Next, you need to know how. So we have two resources, one guide, which has a lot of information about discuss in depth. And next, here's the guide right there on the screen. And next slide, we were going to play another video overview, which I highly, highly encourage folks give this a watch. It's pretty quick, just three and a half minutes. Mo went over a lot of the things in this video already, so we're going to skip it for a time so we have more space to brainstorm and practice. But it's a great video you can watch after the call. Okay, so let's do a quick solo brainstorm, just a couple of minutes. I'm going to stop speaking. We encourage folks, hopefully you have a pen and paper. If not, go grab one. And now it's time to make a plan. So who do you want to speak with? What values do you think you could agree on? And what are some topics that you think might be useful? So in the worksheet we've shared, we have some broadly popular and bipartisan discussion items if you want to try to pull any of those in. And make sure to be specific. So write down the group names or the people, individual names, and what kind of topics you want to bring up in those spaces. All right, we'll let folks get started. Feel free to share questions if you have them in the chat. Okay, that wasn't a ton of time for brainstorming, but we do want to have a quick breakout where folks can connect with one another. So I'm going to keep us moving. Keep brainstorming on your own. Okay. So I hope you came up with good ideas. I see some folks are already sharing in the chat, so keep sharing with one another. We inspire each other, so we'll learn together. Before we start our second action, I'm going to pass it over to my colleagues, Megan and Marissa, who are going to share a quick example conversation. So over to you, Megan and Mo.
Thank you, Hillary. All right, I'm just going to pull us up on the screen. Hi, everybody. I am Megan. I use she, her pronouns, and I work with Marissa and Hillary on Sierra Club's National Digital Strategy team. All right, so yeah, as Hillary mentioned, Marissa and I are going to do a quick role play. She's going to play someone who is really concerned about the negative impact that offshore wind might have on whales and wildlife. And I'm going to listen to her concerns and share some offshore wind facts. So I will turn it over to Mo to start.
I really wish that the environmental groups would stop trying to convince us that offshore wind is a good thing. It's obviously harmful, hurts the wildlife, the whales. I don't get how anybody could support it.
I do remember you saying how much you enjoyed that whale watching trip that you took last year, but where did you hear that about offshore wind?
Oh, I think on social media. Yeah, I'm not sure, but isn't that terrible?
There's a lot of information floating around out there, and I love whales too, so I know. I don't know if you remember, but I first got into environmental work because of a marine ecology class, and learning how threatened ocean species are really stuck with me. It's really sad.
Exactly, exactly. Yes, that's why I don't get why environmentalists can support offshore wind when whales are dying because of it.
Well, I actually just looked into this because someone else said this to me recently, and there's actually no evidence linking wind turbines to whale deaths. The biggest threats to whales are ship strikes and climate change. And I thought this part was wild, but the idea that wind harms whales actually comes directly from the fossil fuel industry because offshore wind is threatening their profits. They don't want it to flourish. But energy is actually one of the best ways that we can protect wildlife by reducing climate threats.
I don't think that can be true. I mean, just think about it. Like, how can these massive structures not have an impact on marine ecosystems? It just doesn't make sense.
That is totally fair. Any big project is going to have some impacts. But when I was reading about all of this, there are places like Scotland that are investing heavily in research and mitigation measures because they know that offshore wind is really necessary to combat climate change. And while I was reading all of that, I was really surprised to learn that Scotland actually gets most of its power from wind, which I thought was really cool.
Oh, wow. Huh. I guess I didn't realize that, but yeah, I forgot you work on this stuff. I should have asked you. I guess it's good it's being studied and I don't know. I'm still not sure I think it's a good idea, but yeah, I'll look into it more. And scene.
And see. So, the purpose of this conversation was to just show a example of how a respectful, informed conversation could move someone from opposition to curiosity and open the door to future learning and advocacy. So I'm going to bring the slides back up here. All right, and I'm also going to unspotlight. Perfect. Okay. All right. So, as Hillary mentioned earlier, in a moment, we're going to break into small group discussions with about 3 to 5 other people. And if you don't want to do the breakout, if I saw some people said in the chat that they're at work or, aren't unable to come off mute but are listening, it is okay to skip it and you can continue preparing on your own. But I do want to remind you all that the goal here is to have these conversations with people who might not always agree with us. And so why not practice with others who we know care about protecting our environment? For full transparency, I am an introvert who feels very similarly to what many of you put in the chat at the start of this call. I'm also an angry crier. So when things get heated and I'm having a tough conversation and people are throwing facts at me or things that I don't, fully understand, or the conversation's getting derailed, I get really flustered. I can end up crying. It's really embarrassing. The only thing that has helped me feel better about having these conversations is practicing with friendly people, like my coworkers. So I definitely, and doing the prep that we're talking about as well. So I definitely recommend you take advantage of this time. Even if it's uncomfortable, it's also a good chance to meet some other folks who are part of the action hours and are part of this community. And we're going to drop the link to the worksheet in the chat that has, more details and more information for you. So 2 ideas Okay, yeah, I just want to make sure that's on the right side. So there are two ways that you can use this time, and you can decide as a group once you're in your breakout. One idea is to brainstorm. So everyone can share where you plan to have these conversations and with whom. So what you worked with with Hillary on. What are you nervous about? Do you want advice from the group on what to discuss? What questions do you have? And then the second option is to actually practice, kind of like what Mo and I did, have a short conversation in pairs. So we suggest you can assume the other person believes in human cause climate change and protecting our environment. A good goal would be to simply learn more about them or engage them to take action. So when you get into the group, please pick one option to start. We're, not going to have a ton of time, so you probably won't get to both. And please make sure everyone has a chance to speak. And if you do decide to practice the conversations and you're likely going to have more than 2 people in your breakout, just make sure to take turns so everyone gets a chance. So I'm going to ask Hillary to open the breakouts now. And we're going to have 5 minutes, 5-ish minutes for breakouts. We will send a chat to folks before we close them.